She was in my shower when it all started. Out of nowhere, my home neighbor, Sharon Lewis, showed up at my cabin with a group of guests acting like she owned the place. She began announcing some so-called business retreat to 4 bewildered strangers while I stood in the doorway of my own home. Now, I'm an electrician by trade, the one who personally wired every inch of this cabin, so when Sharon refused to leave, I locked the front gate and shut off the lights. Total blackout, not a single bulb left burning. What those guests uncovered about Sharon in that moment will leave you stunned. Her betrayal runs so deep, it's almost unbelievable. Let me paint the picture. My name's Jake Morrison, 34 years old, a master electrician who runs a small contracting business here in Colorado. I bought this mountain cabin 3 years ago as an escapee, far from people, far from drama, nestled 3 miles up a narrow road, surrounded by pines, with a view that feels like the world disappears. But this cabin is more than just a getaway. It's my workshop, my test site for new security and electrical systems. Every wire, every camera, every circuit breaker installed by me, that detail, trust me, will matter. It all began when I found something that chilled me to the bone. While doing a maintenance check on my truck, my flashlight caught a device hidden beneath the bumper. A GPS tracker, magnet-mounted, professional grade, the kind with months of battery life. Someone had been following me, monitoring where I went, learning my habits. I didn't know who until 2 days later. I was enjoying a quiet morning on the deck when the sound of engines broke the silence. Gravel crunched as a white van and a black SUV climbed my private road. My gut twisted. I recognized the van, Sharon Lewis's. She loved to parade around town as if she were some polished business executive. In reality, Sharon was nothing more than our HOA's self-appointed community coordinator, a meaningless title she gave herself when the rest of us stopped caring about meetings. And here she was, rolling up to my cabin with 4 strangers. Through my cameras, I watched her climb out, clutching a cheap bottle of wine and wearing a blazer that screamed clearance rack. The 4 guests with her looked lost and uneasy as they realized how remote we were. "Jake," Sharon called out, all fake sweetness. "Surprise. I brought my executive retreat participants here to enjoy your beautiful cabin. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. You just relax." She waved the bottle like she was leading an orchestra, completely ignoring the fact that she was trespassing. I stood there on my porch, coffee still in hand, watching this woman who had been tracking my movements pretend she had the right to invade my home. Her boldness was unbelievable. But in that instant, I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Sharon wasn't just an annoying busybody. She was manipulative, invasive, and a threat. I decided I wouldn't argue with her. People like Sharon live in their own world. Instead, I used the advantage I had built into this cabin. Pulling up the security app on my phone, I activated what I call my lockdown protocol, a system I designed for break-ins, never thinking I'd need it for unwanted guests. The steel gate at the driveway slammed shut with a metallic echo. Heavy duty, designed to stop even a truck. Sharon's smile cracked for the first time. "What was that noise?" she asked nervously. I didn't answer. Next, I cut the power to all exterior lights. The mountain dimmed, shadows swallowing the property. Through my thermal cameras, I could see the 4 strangers shifting uneasily. This was nothing like the retreat they were promised. Finally, I powered up the outdoor sound system. My voice boomed across the property. "This is private property. You are trespassing. All movements are being recorded. You have 1 chance to explain yourselves before I call the sheriff." Sharon's fake composure shattered instantly. The wine bottle slipped from her hand and smashed on the deck, red liquid spilling like a crime scene. The guests panicked, talking over each other in fear. "Oh, what is happening here? This isn't what you promised us." One of the guests finally spoke up, panic and frustration rising in their voice. The strangers looked at Sharon with suspicion, while Sharon herself turned pale, her eyes darting between the locked gate and my cabin like a trapped animal searching for an exit. Then a woman in medical scrubs, bundled under a heavy coat, stepped forward with quiet authority. "I'm Dr. Emily Torres," she declared, her breath clouding in the cold air. "I paid $800 for this wellness retreat weekend. I even have paperwork from my hospital. This was supposed to count toward my continuing education credits." "Sharon, what exactly is going on here?" Before Sharon could answer, her purse slipped from her shoulder and spilled across the deck, among tissues, receipts, and random junk. Something caught my eye, something that told me this was about to get much worse. The next morning, my world tilted again. I was barely into my first coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Tommy Parker, my business partner and the one person I trusted with the technical side of our contracts. His voice was tight, carrying something I had never heard from him before: fear. "Jake, sit down," he said without his usual humor. "I ran those license plates you sent me from yesterday. Sharon's van, a broken bar. It's been parked near your cabin every single day for the last 3 weeks. Every day while you were working in town." The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. 3 weeks. She had been using my cabin like her own headquarters behind my back. "That's not the worst of it," Tommy continued, lowering his voice. "I checked with my cousin in dispatch. Sharon filed a change of address with the Postal Service 2 months ago. She's been receiving her mail at your cabin, bank statements, credit applications, even business correspondence." The realization hit like a physical punch. This wasn't just trespassing. It was fraud, identity theft, and God knows what else. She had essentially tried to move into my life without me knowing. I stepped outside, needing the cold air to steady me. That's when I noticed the little things. The patio chairs weren't arranged the way I'd left them. The cushions showed wear patterns that weren't mine. Even my grill had been shifted, leaving scuff marks on the deck. She hadn't just been squatting, she'd been living here, using my belongings, erasing my boundaries. The GPS tracker on my truck was how she avoided getting caught. Down by the locked gate, the 5 intruders were still stranded, but their dynamic had shifted. Dr. Emily had taken charge, organizing them like she was back in an ER. She divided snacks into rations, set up shifts to stay warm, and began interrogating Sharon about every detail of this so-called retreat. Another guest, Michael Thomas, introduced himself as a corporate lawyer. He methodically recorded everything on his phone and laptop, his precision showing he was already preparing a case. Sharon, meanwhile, was unraveling. Her professional persona had collapsed. Her wrinkled blazer looked like it had been slept in, her makeup smeared, and she kept checking her phone as if some miracle was going to save her. Whenever Dr. Emily or Michael pressed her with direct questions, her excuses grew weaker and less believable. "This is all just a misunderstanding," Sharon kept repeating, her voice cracking. "Jake and I have an arrangement. He lets me use the cabin for business." But when Michael asked for written proof, Sharon claimed she'd left it at home. When Dr. Emily asked to see the retreat schedule, Sharon insisted it was on a different laptop. Each excuse made her look guiltier. The other two, Marcus and Linda, were unraveling in their own ways. Marcus, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, paced in circles muttering about child support and how he hadn't signed up for this madness. Linda clutched her laptop bag like it was the last thing tethering her to sanity, going completely silent after Dr. Emily pointed out the fake testimonials and stolen photos on Sharon's website. These weren't hardened criminals. They were desperate people sucked into Sharon's lies. And it was time for me to turn up the pressure. I activated the outdoor speakers again, this time for hourly announcements, partly informative, partly psychological warfare. "Hour 2 of your unauthorized stay," my voice boomed from the tree line. "For your safety, be aware. Mountain temperatures drop quickly after dark. Hypothermia becomes a risk if you are not prepared. All movements are being recorded in high definition for law enforcement." The effect was instant. Sharon flinched every time my voice echoed. Dr. Emily and Michael, however, looked at her with new, sharper suspicion of the kind of scrutiny professionals reserve for liars caught in the act. "Sharon," Dr. Emily's voice rang out, steady and commanding as the thin mountain air carried Dr. Emily's voice with sharp clarity, "if you had permission to be here, why does the actual owner sound like we're intruders?" By the 4th hour, Sharon's entire story had collapsed. Michael, with his sharp legal instincts, began dissecting every piece of evidence she had shown them. Her so-called business license, filed only 3 months ago despite her claiming she'd been hosting retreats for 3 years. The glowing testimonial videos, stock images and staged footage Michael traced back to modeling sites. Even the scenic photos on her website, stolen from a high-end resort in Aspen. "This is fraud," Michael said firmly, his tone calm and final. "A textbook scam involving stolen identities and property violations. Sharon, you're facing serious federal charges." The blood drained from Sharon's face. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just dealing with an angry homeowner, she was staring down possible prison time. Her desperation showed immediately. She tried to flip the narrative, painting me as the unstable one. "He's overreacting. Look at this military-style lockdown. Doesn't that seem dangerous to you?" she insisted. "He's probably some veteran with TSD. You can't trust people like that. They're unpredictable." But Dr. Emily cut her down without hesitation. "I treat trauma patients every day," she said coldly. Jake's response has been logical, measured, and entirely appropriate for someone whose home has been invaded. "Your behavior, however, shows classic signs of narcissism and even sociopathy." Delivered in that professional, clinical tone, it hit harder than any insult ever could. As darkness fell, I watched through my cameras as the group fractured completely. Emily and Michael had clearly aligned against Sharon, focused only on getting away from her. Marcus was openly sobbing, terrified about the legal mess he was trapped in. Linda sat frozen, staring at her laptop bag, unresponsive to anything around her, and Sharon was showing the first cracks of the breakdown that would consume her in the months ahead. I decided it was time to sweep my cabin thoroughly, every drawer, every closet, every space that could hide something. And what I found in the guest bedroom nearly knocked the wind out of me. She had turned it into her personal office. Multiple laptops, a professional printer, neatly stacked fake business documents, and my filing cabinets stuffed with records on dozens of people. My property, my electricity, my internet had been fueling her criminal empire. The scope of her planning chilled me. Sharon had detailed profiles on 47 cabin owners across 3 counties, work schedules, income, mortgage details, property values, even hobbies. She knew exactly when each of them would be away, down to the hour. And then I found her active targets folder. My folder was 3 inches thick. She had studied me for half a year, recording my daily routine with military precision. She knew I left at 7:15 every morning. She knew about my coffee runs at Murphy's Diner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She even tracked my hiking routes on weekends. The GPS tracker on my truck was just the last piece of her surveillance. As I processed all this, Tommy arrived with news that made everything worse. His cousin at the sheriff's department had dug into Sharon's record. "She's a repeat offender," Tommy told me grimly as we stood on the deck, watching the chaos below. "She's been arrested before in Wyoming, in Utah. Same pattern every time. She targets remote property owners, dangles fake business opportunities, sets up her scams, then vanishes before the law catches up." Before her victims could even realize what had happened, Sharon's scam was already collapsing. The 5 people still trapped at my locked gate had endured another sleepless night, and the mental strain was obvious. Dr. Emily and Michael had stepped fully into leadership roles, essentially running a crisis team. They were documenting every detail of Sharon's fraud, building a case for her when law enforcement finally arrived. They even convinced Marcus and Linda to cooperate, promising leniency if they provided written statements. Both accomplices eagerly agreed that they had no loyalty left for Sharon and were desperate to save themselves. Sharon, on the other hand, was unraveling completely. Psychologists call it a narcissistic collapse, the moment someone who thrives on control and manipulation suddenly loses their grip. She abandoned the polished business persona and spiraled into paranoid rants. Every few hours she launched into long speeches about how she was the real victim, how everyone was against her, how none of this was her fault. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Sharon screamed once, her voice bouncing off the mountains. "I have debts, responsibilities, people depending on me." But when Dr. Emily calmly asked who those people were, Sharon's response dissolved into nonsense about imaginary investors and non-existent opportunities. That's when Michael uncovered something that took this from a neighborhood scam to a full-blown felony. With his legal eye, he spotted discrepancies in her paperwork. Sharon had been siphoning money from the HOA's emergency fund, the very money meant for wildfire prevention and road repairs. $15,000 gone, funneled into her fake company. "This changes everything," Michael declared, his voice grim. "That's felony embezzlement. Added to the identity theft, mail fraud, and trespassing, she's looking at a serious prison sentence. But Sharon didn't even seem to hear him. She was too far gone in her breakdown to grasp the reality of what she was facing. Meanwhile, word spread like fire through our small mountain community. Tommy's phone rang non-stop with neighbors calling to report their own suspicious encounters. Mrs. Henderson, 2 miles down the mountain, said Sharon had approached her weeks earlier about investment opportunities. Bill Brown, who ran a cabin rental business by the lake, admitted Sharon had been prying into his booking records and client data. It was suddenly clear this wasn't random. Sharon had been methodically targeting every valuable property in the region. My cabin wasn't her prize, it was her headquarters. She had been preparing to bleed our whole community dry until I discovered that tracker. Dr. Emily, with her medical background, read Sharon like an open book. She's showing the hallmarks of antisocial personality disorder, she explained to Michael. No empathy, no responsibility, inflated self-image. This isn't stress, it's who she is behind the mask. By the third day, the accomplices had fully turned on her. Marcus cracked first, handing over bank records that showed Sharon had swindled more than $18,000 from various victims in the last 8 months. Linda went even further. She gave up her laptop, which held every scrap of marketing material she'd made for Sharon, along with spreadsheets of potential targets. The most damning evidence was buried in Linda's files. She had kept obsessive, meticulous records of the entire operation as step-by-step outlines of how Sharon identified victims, scouted properties, profiled targets, timed her moves, and extracted money. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It was the blueprint of a criminal empire. Watching it all unfold through my cameras, I realized, stopping Sharon wasn't just about protecting myself, it was no longer just about defending my own property. Sharon had been laying the groundwork to prey on dozens of families in our community, many of them elderly retirees who had moved to the mountains for peace and security. The money she'd already stolen wasn't just numbers on paper, it was people's emergency funds, their life savings, the financial safety net they relied on for retirement. The turning point came when I uncovered Sharon's darkest secret buried inside her fake business files. She hadn't been choosing victims at random. She had deliberately been researching single men living alone on valuable mountain properties, using romance scams and fake partnerships as her way in. The so-called retreat she was running was just her latest scheme, a way to bring several victims under one roof and squeeze as much as she could from them at once. The thought that made my stomach turn was realizing how far she had planned to expand this operation. If she hadn't been stopped, she could have wiped out the financial security of countless families in our region. What looked like scattered fraud was in fact a calculated business model of Crimea, using my cabin as her command center. When Deputy Smith finally ran a full background check on Sharon, his expression told me everything. He didn't just find a list of petty scams. He found something that made him radio for immediate backup. What came back wasn't a history of small fraud cases, it was an ongoing federal investigation spread across 3 states. Sharon Lewis wasn't just a neighborhood swindler. She was tied to a multi-state identity theft ring that had already drained over $200,000 from rural property owners throughout the Mountain West. "Jake, this is much bigger than we realized," Deputy Smith told me gravely as he stepped from his patrol car, joined by 2 more deputies and a state bureau detective. "She's wanted in Utah and Wyoming, and she's flagged federally for financial crimes targeting the elderly. We're not dealing with trespassing anymore, this is organized fraud." The reaction from the group stuck in my driveway was instant. Dr. Emily and Michaela, who had spent 3 exhausting days gathering evidence like unpaid detectives, were suddenly recognized as star witnesses in a federal case. Marcus and Linda, who had hoped to cut a deal with their confessions, now faced the terrifying possibility of years in prison. But Sharon's response eclipsed them all. When she saw the flashing lights, she didn't break down or admit guilt. Instead, she launched into a wild performance, shouting to the officers, "Thank God you're here. He's been holding us hostage for days. He's unstable, dangerous. Arrest him." The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing on property she had illegally occupied for months, trying to flip the script as though she were the victim. Detective Ruth Williams from the State Bureau wasn't fooled for a second. She quickly reviewed the evidence I'd compiled of the GPS tracker, My security footage, the documents Marcus and Linda had surrendered, the fake office Sharon had set up in my guest room and immediately ordered Sharon's arrest. Hearing the charges read out loud in official legal language made even the crimes I already knew about sound chilling: aggravated identity theft, mail fraud, embezzlement of community funds, criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. What happened next looked like a house of cards collapsing. As Detective Williams read her rights, Sharon's carefully crafted persona disintegrated. The polished businesswoman gave way to a shrieking, sobbing figure, hurling blame at anyone she could name. "You can't do this to me. I'm respected here. I have connections," she wailed as the cuffs snapped shut. The most devastating blow came when the detective laid out Sharon's true history. The warrants from Utah and Wyoming weren't for similar crimes, they were for the exact same scam. Sharon had been running this grift for more than 2 years, moving from state to state as law enforcement closed in. She had targeted more than 60 properties, stolen over $200,000, and left a trail of devastated victims who lost everything to her lies. Dr. Emily and Michael were released, but their part was far from over. Their meticulous notes from 3 straight days of surveillance had become what Detective Williams called the most thorough victim testimony she'd encountered in 2 decades of financial crime cases. With their professional credibility and medical and legal backgrounds, they could clearly explain how Sharon manipulated and exploited people. As for Marcus and Linda, interrogation revealed how deeply woven into Sharon's schemes they had been. 6 months earlier, she had hooked Marcus by preying on his financial desperation and child support struggles. His job was logistics, scouting properties, tracking schedules, arranging transportation. Linda's role was different. She was the architect of the scam's presentation. She designed the fake websites, created the marketing material, and built the illusion of legitimacy that made Sharon's fraud so convincing. Linda's confession ended up being the most devastating blow to Sharon's defense. As the designer who had created all the glossy marketing for Sharon's fake business, she had meticulously kept records of every fabricated document, forged testimonial, and stolen image used to lure victims. Her files proved that Sharon hadn't planned to stop with a handful of targets, as she had ambitions to scale her fraud operation, setting her sights on vacation property owners, cabin rental companies, and retired couples who had chosen mountain living for its peace and safety. The financial investigation revealed something even more chilling. Sharon's crimes weren't random thefts. She was deliberately exploiting the trust of people who had moved to rural areas specifically to escape the chaos and crime of urban life. Many of her victims were elderly couples surviving on fixed retirement incomes, their homes representing both their security and their life savings. Detective Williams explained that Sharon's behavior matched the psychological profile of what experts call a predatory narcissist, someone who deliberately seeks out vulnerable people and manipulates their emotions to drain them financially. "They don't just take your money," Williams told me as we watched Sharon being prepared for transport to county jail. "They rob people of their security, their peace of mind, and their faith in humanity." The emotional scars often run deeper than the financial damage. The community's response was immediate. Within hours of Sharon's arrest, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors began sharing stories of strange encounters with her. Mrs. Henderson recalled Sharon pressing her for details about her late husband's life insurance. Bill Brown said Sharon offered to manage his vacation rental finances in exchange for access to his accounts. Even our local mail carrier reported that Sharon had tried to intercept packages addressed to others on our mountain route. As Sharon was being loaded into the transport vehicle, she made one last attempt to twist the narrative. Shouting through the wire mesh, she claimed, "This is all a huge misunderstanding. Jake Morrison is unstable. He's been harassing me for months. Check his military record. Veterans like him can't be trusted." The irony was staggering. A career con artist questioning someone else's integrity. But that outburst revealed something deeper about her character. She was utterly incapable of owning responsibility, even when the evidence was undeniable. I thought that momenta theorista was the conclusion of my nightmare, but I learned quickly that dealing with a narcissistic criminal is like trying to squash a cockroach. You think it's over, only for it to come back nastier than before. Within 48 hours, Sharon posted bail, thanks to a bondsman more interested in his paycheck than the severity of her crimes. What followed was 6 weeks of relentless harassment, the most systematic campaign I've ever endured. The legal attacks came first. Within a week, I was blindsided with 3 separate lawsuits, one accusing me of threatening her life, another alleging I had damaged her business equipment, and a civil rights claim insisting I had restricted her freedom of movement. Each claim was a blatant lie, but everyone demanded my time, money, and legal defense. Sharon's strategy was obvious: drain me financially until I gave up and settled. Her attorney, if you could even call him that, since he looked like he'd bought his law degree from a bargain bin, filed a non-stop string of motions and appeals. He argued that her criminal detention was illegal, demanded her bail terms be eased so she could return to her cabin, and even requested access to my private security footage to prove I'd been stalking her. Each motion was more absurd than the last, but everyone forced a legal response. And then came the social media war, where Sharon revealed just how venomous she could be. She spun up fake accounts across multiple platforms, launching a smear campaign painting me as some unstable mountain hermit. According to her online rants, I was a dangerous veteran suffering from PTSD who had trapped innocent business professionals and threatened their lives using military tactics. She didn't stop there. She posted my business information, my cabin's location, and even my truck's license plate number, warning her online followers to be careful around me. Soon, fake reviews of my business began appearing everywhere, each one parroting her narrative and poisoning my reputation. The inspector. She accused me of making unpermitted electrical changes, installing an illegal septic system, and even creating fire hazards that endangered the whole community. Each bogus complaint triggered official inspections, costing me fees, lost work hours, and the humiliation of having inspectors comb through my home looking for violations that didn't exist. Her cruelty went beyond paperwork. Sharon manipulated people around me by preying on their genuine concerns. She called my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, pretending to worry about my mental stability, urging her to keep an eye out for dangerous behavior. She phoned my clients, posing as a concerned citizen, warning them about my legal troubles. She even contacted my insurance company, claiming I was using my cabin for illegal commercial purposes that voided my policy. 3 weeks into this relentless campaign, the truth about her strategy became clear. Tommy spotted Sharon parked at the base of my mountain road, binoculars in hand, a notebook on her lap. She wasn't just harassing me, she was conducting surveillance. In that notebook were meticulous logs of my comings and goings, the movements of my truck, and even who visited me. When Tommy confronted her, Sharon brushed it off with a laugh, claiming she was bird watching, but the details in her notes proved otherwise. That's when it hit me. Her harassment wasn't random at all. It was organized. She was cutting me off from friends, smearing my reputation, draining my finances, and studying my habits. This wasn't retaliation, it was preparation for something much bigger. Her plan began to unravel when she made a critical mistake. While snapping photos of my property from the public road, she accidentally captured another home in the background of the vacation cabin of retired federal Judge William Carter. Carter quickly ran her license plate and, upon learning about her criminal record and current case, wasted no time contacting law enforcement. Judge Carter looked over her case file and her harassment complaints against you, Deputy Smith told me during one of his check-ins. His exact words were, "This woman is showing signs of escalating toward violence." He's requested Step 2 patrols and recommended we treat this as a credible stalking situation. With that revelation, everything came into focus. The lawsuits, the fake reviews, the bogus building code complaints, every piece was part of a larger strategy to wear me down and force me off my land. But what could possibly make my cabin so valuable to Sharon that she'd risk new charges just to push me out? The answer came from the last person anyone expected: Sharon's daughter, Amy Lewis. At just 22 years old, Amy had been watching her mother spiral deeper into erratic, obsessive behavior. When she discovered the surveillance notes and learned about the stalking accusations, Amy finally reached her breaking point. She went directly to Detective Williams with a recorded statement. "My mom isn't just fixated on Jake's cabin," Amy admitted she was planning to use it as collateral in a massive loan fraud scheme. She wanted to forge documents claiming ownership of the cabin and then secure loans from multiple banks. The harassment was all about driving Jake away long enough to move in and fake residency. The scope of Sharon's plan was staggering. She had researched adverse possession laws in Colorado and convinced herself she could fabricate ownership through fraudulent residency documents. What I thought was harassment turned out to be a calculated scheme to steal my home and turn it into the centerpiece of a multi-bank loan scam. The so-called business was nothing more than a smokescreen. Sharon's true objective was far darker. She wanted to steal my property outright using forged paperwork and legal loopholes. But her harassment campaign had a side effect she hadn't counted on. Instead of cutting me off from everyone, her increasingly erratic behavior pushed the community away from her and closer to me. Neighbors who once kept their distance were now openly supporting me. Clients who heard about the fake reviews began recommending my services out of sympathy. Even people who didn't know me personally could see through Sharon's lies, recognizing her online attacks as vicious and fabricated. Then came the phone call that shifted everything. Detective Williams rang early one Tuesday morning, her voice sharp with urgency. "Jake, get down to the station right away. Amy Lewis just walked in with information that changes the whole case. And bring coffee, you're going to need it." When I arrived, Amy looked nothing like the self-assured young woman I'd occasionally seen with her mother. In the interview room, she appeared drained, frightened, and worn down, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila folder. It was her insurance, evidence she had been quietly gathering for months in case Sharon's crimes finally caught up with them. "I need to tell you about the catfishing," she whispered. Amy revealed that Sharon hadn't just looked up my records, she had forced her own daughter to create fake online identities to lure me into conversations. On dating apps, social media, even professional sites, Amy had spent months pretending to be different women in order to extract details about my daily life, my habits, and my vulnerabilities. The realization hit me like a gut punch. Suddenly those odd messages from random women, the casual conversations that fizzled out, the strangers who seemed strangely curious about my schedule, all of it made sense. It had been Sharon's psychological manipulation, carried out through her daughter. Inside Amy's folder were screenshots of hundreds of messages, personality profiles she'd been instructed to compile about me, and notes from Sharon dictating exactly what information to gather. Through tears, Amy explained, "Mom called it social engineering. She told me it was just research for her business. I didn't realize what it was really for until I saw the forged property documents." Detective Williams laid out Amy's evidence on the conference table like puzzle pieces of a nightmare. There were forged deeds, fake loan applications, counterfeit residency papers, and even a detailed step-by-step guide Sharon had written for stealing property under the guise of adverse possession laws. Sharon wasn't just after my cabin, as she had built an entire system for taking over anyone's land through fraud. The catfishing was only the start, Amy continued, her voice gaining strength as she exposed the full scope of her mother's crimes. "She's been running this scheme for 3 years, not just a few months. She targets single men who live alone on valuable rural properties, manipulates them with romance scams to gather intel, then sets up fake businesses to justify moving on to their land while filing fraudulent claims of ownership." Amy's evidence showed Sharon had already succeeded in stealing 2 properties in Utah and 1 in Wyoming using the same playbook. In each case, she identified an isolated owner, collected personal details through manipulation and surveillance, and then used false business fronts while pushing fraudulent residency and ownership claims. She kept detailed files on every victim, Amy said, opening a laptop filled with what looked like a criminal database. There were photos, financial records, schedules, psychological profiles, even notes about their families and friends. My file was the thickest of them all. Sharon had been following me for over a year. She knew my daily routine, as how I drank my morning coffee, when I went hiking on weekends, my work hours, even the personal details of my last relationship and why it ended. The GPS tracker she planted was only the final piece of an already extensive surveillance web. And then came the most chilling discovery. Amy placed a thick folder on the table labeled Phase 3. Inside was Sharon's plan for what she called permanent property acquisition. It went beyond just stealing my cabin. It outlined a method to systematically destroy my reputation, sabotage my relationships, and make it impossible for me to fight back legally. Mom even dug into Jake's military records, Amy said, pointing at documents that revealed just how deep Sharon was willing to go. Inside the folder were documents I had never seen before. Sharon had discovered my military service in Afghanistan and was preparing to weaponize PTSD stereotypes against me. Her plan was to paint me as unstable, potentially dangerous, and incapable of managing my own affairs, all to weaken my credibility if I challenged her theft in court. But her scheme went even further. She intended to use the catfishing operation to fabricate fake relationships, then expose me as someone deceiving women online, coupled with fabricated bad reviews, phony building violations, and rumors about my mental health. She aimed to strip away my community support until I looked like a man too unstable to manage his own life. Sharon would then swoop in, posing as the responsible neighbor stepping up to handle the property on my behalf. Detective Williams looked drained. Her expression hardened with every word of Amy's testimony. Finally, she asked, "Amy, what made you come forward now? This level of detail shows your mother has been preparing for a long time." Amy's answer silenced the entire room, even the court reporter and the federal agent taking notes for hours. "She made me help with Jake's personal research, but when I realized she wasn't just planning to steal from him, she wanted to hurt him, maybe even kill him, I knew I had to stop her." That single revelation changed the case completely. Amy handed over text messages, recordings, and handwritten notes proving Sharon had researched methods of harming someone without leaving evidence. She'd studied prescription drug combinations, staged carbon monoxide leaks, and accidents that could be arranged on remote property. Mom said Jake was too smart, too stubborn to walk away like her other victims, Amy explained, her voice shaking. If the legal tricks and psychological games didn't break him, she was ready with what she called a permanent solutions. I believe she was considering killing him. The FBI agent who had been quietly listening suddenly leaned forward, recognizing the seriousness of the claim. What had started as a local fraud case had escalated into a potential attempted murder investigation, possibly tied to crimes across several states. Sharon Lewis wasn't just a scam artist. She was a predator who grew more dangerous when her fraud failed. Amy's final disclosure was the most chilling. "This isn't the first time she's done this," she said, tears running down her cheeks. She described a man named Robert Turner in Wyoming who had fought Sharon's fraudulent ownership claim in court. Just weeks later, while he was away visiting family, his cabin burned to the ground. Sharon had celebrated the fire as if she had won a prize. Detective Williams immediately contacted Wyoming authorities to reopen Turner's case as possible arson. The pattern was undeniably romance scams, forged documents, identity theft, and when those failed, escalation to violence. As Amy's testimony concluded, she turned towards me, her face streaked with tears. "Jake, I'm sorry, I helped her hurt you. And I helped her hurt others. I was terrified of her, but that doesn't excuse it. She made me promise to help get rid of you permanently if nothing else worked. That's when I realized I had to choose to protect my mother, or protect innocent people." When sentencing day arrived, the courthouse was overflowing. This wasn't an ordinary hearing, it felt like the entire mountain community had come for justice. Word had spread beyond the region, and victims from 3 states traveled to Colorado to watch Sharon finally face accountability. The gallery was filled with people whose lives she had devastated: elderly couples, veterans, small business owners. They weren't faceless names in Sharon's files anymore, they were living proof of the destruction she left behind. Sharon entered in an orange prison jumpsuit, her once polished image completely gone. Her confident, manipulative persona had crumbled into nervous glances at the crowd that had come to see her downfall. Judge Patricia Hayes reviewed everything: the forged documents, the victim statements, the psychological evaluations, and Amy's damning testimony. Her voice carried the weight of decades on the bench as she addressed Sharon. "Ms. Lewis," she said firmly, "in all my years, I have rarely seen a defendant act with such calculated cruelty towards vulnerable people." The prosecution had originally asked for 8 years in state prison on charges of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. But Amy's revelations about Sharon's violent intentions changed everything. Federal prosecutors soon filed charges related to the Wyoming arson, and the FBI linked Sharon to multiple suspicious fires in Utah that had once been ruled accidental. Judge Hayes addressed the courtroom with an intensity that silenced everyone present. This court has reviewed overwhelming evidence of your systematic exploitation of rural property owners. These weren't impulsive mistakes or desperate choices. They were deliberate crimes carried out through a carefully organized scheme to prey on the most vulnerable members of our community. Sharon's defense attorney, the same ineffective man who had filed her endless frivolous lawsuits, made one final attempt to portray her as a misunderstood woman. "Your Honor," he began, "Miss Lewis struggled with emotional trauma and financial strain. She is a single mother who made poor choices, but she never intended real harm." The argument was so hollow that people in the gallery laughed. Judge Hayes cut him off without hesitation. "Mr. Patterson, this was not poor judgment, it was calculated. Your client researched, plotted, and executed an operation involving identity theft, fraud, stalking, harassment, and preparations for physical violence against anyone who resisted her. The record shows intent, persistence, and cruelty." Then came the sentence that broke Sharon completely. This court sentences Sharon Lewis to 12 years in the Colorado State Penitentiary, followed by 10 years of supervised probation. She will provide restitution to all victims, forfeit all assets obtained through criminal activity, and is permanently barred from holding any business license in the state of Colorado. At those words, Sharon collapsed into her chair, gasping, crying, and screaming about the unfairness of it all. Medics rushed in as she alternated between begging the judge for mercy and shouting at the courtroom. But the true final blow came from her daughter. Amy Lewis stood up and, with a steady voice, told the court, "Your Honor, I am changing my name. I will no longer be connected to Sharon Lewis or her crimes. For 2 years she forced me to help her hurt innocent people. I am thankful she'll never again have the chance to control me or anyone else." The gallery erupted in applause, something rarely seen in a courtroom. Sharon's own child had severed ties with her in front of the world. She had lost her freedom, her wealth, her reputation, and now even her daughter. During the restitution phase, the full scope of Sharon's theft came to light. She had stolen more than $85,000 from victims, plus $15,000 siphoned from our HOA's emergency fund. The judge ordered her to repay every cent, with interest and legal costs included. With no legitimate assets, since nearly everything she owned had been purchased with stolen funds, Sharon would spend the next decade working prison jobs at 20 cents an hour to pay her debt. The impact of her downfall rippled far beyond that courtroom. Our HOA restructured its entire financial oversight system, bringing in new leadership committed to transparency. The county also adopted stricter verification rules for business operations on residential land. For the first time, our mountain community truly united. Out of shared hardship came resilience. My electrical business, which Sharon had tried to destroy with fake reviews, not only survived but grew stronger. Word spread that I was the electrician who had uncovered a serial fraudster. Calls came from across 3 counties, from clients who wanted security systems installed by the man who had outsmarted a professional criminal. The story of my cabin lockdown became something of a legend in our community. I was no longer just the quiet mountain hermit. I was regarded as someone who had stood his ground against a predator. Even more meaningful were the friendships that grew from the ordeal. Dr. Emily Torres and Michael Thomas became true allies. They spoke on my behalf, reinforcing that I had acted responsibly under pressure. Michael even partnered with me in filing a lawsuit against Sharon's bail bondsman for negligence in supervising her during her harassment campaign. Watching Sharon face justice brought me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. For months she had made me doubt myself and my security measures, my decisions, even my right to live undisturbed on my land. Seeing her escorted away in shackles, with 12 long years of accountability ahead, felt like reclaiming everything she had tried to take from me. The punishment Sharon received felt like reclaiming not only my property but my peace of mind. Federal arson charges in Wyoming were still unresolved, leaving open the possibility of even more prison time. The FBI investigation also uncovered her connections to property crimes in Nevada and New Mexico, proving her criminal reach was much larger than anyone had realized. As I watched her being taken back to county jail before her transfer to state prison, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: a true relief. The woman who had violated my land, stolen my privacy, and tried to destroy my life was finally paying for everything she had done. But the greater victory wasn't just Sharon's imprisonment, it was the strength of the community that rose to stop her. Neighbors who had once been strangers became close friends. Victims from across several states built a support network, helping one another heal and rebuild. Even Amy Lewis, Sharon's own daughter, was moving forward with resilience and honesty after breaking free from her mother's shadow. 2 years later, life seemed normal again. My business was thriving. My cabin had returned to being a quiet retreat, and our mountain community was closer than ever. Then came the phone call that reminded me Sharon's shadow hadn't fully disappeared. "Mr. Morrison, this is Warden Patricia Sullivan from the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility," the voice on the line said. "I need to inform you that inmate Sharon Lewis has been attempting to contact you through unauthorized channels. We've also uncovered disturbing evidence she may still be engaging in criminal activities from inside prison." A chill went through me. Even locked away, even with years of punishment ahead, Sharon was still trying to manipulate. The warden explained that intercepted letters showed Sharon using other inmates' mail privileges to send me carefully written apologies, promises of repayment, and pleas for visits. Hidden in her cell, however, were dozens of other letters, angry rants filled with blame and detailed revenge fantasies. Even worse, Sharon had been teaching other prisoners her property fraud schemes, running what amounted to a criminal training program. "She's essentially building a network from inside," the warden explained. "We're treating this as a major security concern." It was horrifying, but not unexpected. A woman who had devoted her life to fraud wasn't going to stop just because she was behind bars. Yet her actions triggered a consequence she hadn't foreseen. Other inmates, disgusted by her arrogance, began cooperating with federal agents. What they revealed expanded the case far beyond what anyone had imagined. The FBI uncovered ties to similar crimes in 8 states, with damages surpassing $2 million. Meanwhile, Amy Lewis had built a new identity for herself. At 24, she was living in Denver, working as a victim advocate, and using her own painful past to help others. She had changed her name, earned a degree in criminal justice, and now specialized in financial fraud prevention. Her transformation was a rare kind of redemption, choosing honesty and service over repeating the cycle of abuse. Our mountain community also evolved. What started as an informal victim support circle grew into a federally recognized nonprofit helping rural property fraud victims throughout the Mountain West. Dr. Emily Torres became the medical coordinator for trauma survivors. Michael Thomas offered pro bono legal guidance, and I contributed by teaching security strategies to prevent property scams. Even our HOA, once Sharon's playground for embezzlement, became a model of accountability, adopting transparent policies, routine audits, and open communication. The stolen $15,000 had been recovered and reinvested into community safety upgrades. My cabin itself became a symbol of change. Once used as Sharon's base of operations, it had been transformed into a training center. Property owners came to learn about fraud prevention and security systems, while the very room Sharon had used for her schemes now hosted law enforcement workshops. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sharon's attempt to destroy my life had ultimately strengthened it. I had gone from a solitary mountain hermit to a respected community member, with a business stronger than ever and a purpose I'd never envisioned, helping others avoid falling victim to people like her. Sharon Lewis would spend the next decade in prison, followed by another under strict supervision. Her legacy wasn't the empire of fraud she had hoped to build, but instead a community of survivors who had turned their suffering into protection for others. Sometimes, the best revenge truly is living well. That's the story of how one HOA Karen turned my peaceful cabin into the headquarters for her own downfall. Thank you for watching Anadramanest, where justice always finds its way. If you believe Sharon got what she deserved, hit that like button, and stay tuned for the next unbelievable story. Thanks again for watching Anadramanest, where karma writes the ending and common sense finally takes the stage. Like, comment, and subscribe for your weekly dose of real-life mayhem.